Hi again everyone and welcome back to my YouTube channel, Fillers and Filters. If you are tuning in for the first time to my channel, I am Noella, or you can call me Miss Novi, and I wanted to be your partner in learning about languages and developing your English language skills. So if you have already watched the first part of this episode, why we should stop being grammar Nazis, you would know that I have given you 3 reasons why we should stop being overly grammar conscious. But in case you haven't, let's do a quick recap. So that in the previous video, I have emphasized that we should stop being grammar Nazis because language is functional. And the main function of language is for communication, so that as long as we are able to use it based on its function, then we should be okay. So that when we say grammar Nazis, we refer to individuals who are overly or extremely grammar conscious. So the operative word there is extremely or overly. And they are so grammar conscious that they even judge people on the basis of their language use. Well, language is functional. I cannot emphasize this enough. As long as it fulfills its purpose of being used for communication, being used to understand one another, then we should be fine. Grammar can be a second priority. So when I say second priority, that means grammar is also important, but we should not let our grammatical issues hinder us from using language as a tool for communication. So in this episode, I'll be discussing the second reason why we should stop being a grammar Nazi. And that reason is because language is dynamic. So when we say language is dynamic, that means it changes over time. And these changes have resulted in what we now know as varieties of English. Being a grammar Nazi rests on the assumption that there is a one pure, correct, unadulterated variety of English. But that is not exactly the case. In fact, there are different legitimate varieties of English. English has different kinds, it has different varieties, it has different dialects, and so it has different standards. What we may perceive as unacceptable in one variety may be acceptable in another variety. Let's take, for instance, British and American English. So Brits would say flat, while Americans would say apartment. Brits would say lift, and Americans would say elevator. Now, if that's the case, which variety of English is correct? So that the idea of correctness is rather problematic. And the differences between British and American Englishes actually extends to different aspects of the language. In terms of spelling, Brits would spell it this way, while Americans would spell it this way. And these issues are actually not limited to American and British Englishes. So that take note of the term that I used, Englishes, to emphasize the plurality of the kinds of English that are existing or that are emerging in our world. One notable linguist named Brad Catchrew introduced a framework that we now know as the World Englishes paradigm. So Catchrew's framework looks like this. So it's a framework that has 3 concentric circles, which represents the kinds or the varieties of English or Englishes in the world. So what Catchrew is saying is that the inner circle would include the varieties of English in countries where English is the native language. And it includes countries like the US, the UK, New Zealand, Anglophone Canada, and South Africa, and the like. On the other hand, countries or varieties of English within the outer circle would include those countries that have assigned English an official status in some sectors of their society. For instance, as a medium of instruction in academic institutions, or as the language of their law, or even as the language of business, which is actually the case with Philippines. Varieties of English included in the outer circle would include countries that have colonial pasts. So that we have the Philippines, Singapore, Hong Kong, Malaysia, India, and the like. So that English in these countries that I have mentioned is considered a second language because it has been embedded in their society. And lastly, English varieties in the expanding circle would include countries that do not really have English as an official part of their society, but perhaps they are starting to realize the value of English in connecting or facilitating communication with the rest of the world, so they are trying to learn English so that they can use it to their advantage. So these countries would include Japan, Korea, and the like. What you would note with the World English's paradigm, though, is that it's also dynamic. So what used to be part of the expanding circle can become part of the outer circle. For instance, if one of these countries in the expanding circle would decide to come up with their language policy of affording or assigning official status to English, then they become part of the outer circle. And it's also possible for countries in the outer circle to become part of the inner circle. So what now are the implications of the World English's paradigm? Why is it important for us to realize that there are different varieties of Englishes across the globe? So as I have mentioned earlier, we realize that language is dynamic. The English that we know today is different from the English that they have used before, such that we have Old English, Middle English, and even early modern English that is so much different from the English that we know and use today. And language also changes to accommodate new concepts, new ideas, so that the English that they have before might not have the words, technological words like computer, Wi-Fi, nuclear, and the like, because they do not have these concepts or these things before. And we also realize that language changes because of language contact. And because English came in contact with Filipino, the kind of language, the kind of English that we use in the Philippines would be different from the kind of English that they use in the US. And of course, knowing that there are varieties of Englishes in the world, we should realize that we should be less prescriptive, less concerned with the idea of correctness in language use, because, well, what is unacceptable now might be the convention in the future. What is not included in the lexicon today might be included in the lexicon tomorrow. So that when all is said and done, the whole point is that there are different varieties of English and there are different standards based on these varieties. And Philippine English is a legitimate variety of English, and we have a unique way of using language in our country. As such, we should not consider Philippine English as an inferior variety of English. So that if I am more comfortable saying YouTube instead of YouTube, and if you're more comfortable in saying international instead of international, I mean, people shouldn't make a big fuss out of it, because our tongues are configured to speak Filipino, or we have been accustomed to speaking in Filipino. So that if you do not have the kind of accent that native speakers have, as long as you're able to use language to communicate your thoughts, then there shouldn't be a problem at all. But also, it would pay to know the standards of the different varieties of English as well, so that there might be context where you need to shift to another variety or you need to adhere to the standards of a specific variety, then it would be easier for you to do so. But again, let me reiterate, each of these varieties of English are equally functional, they are equally important, and so we should not look down on other varieties of English. And this goes back to our issue, we should stop being grammar Nazis. So hopefully you have learned a thing or two from this installment of our episode. And if you haven't done it yet, make sure that you like my videos, subscribe to my channel, and click that notification bell so that you'll be informed once new content becomes available. Thank you so much again for all your support. Au revoir!